Should I start?
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening and welcome to this PCS Live Facebook event. I'm Fran Heathcote, President of PCS, and I'm delighted tonight to be joined by Rachel Hopkins MP and Mark Sawatka, our General Secretary. And obviously we're meeting in the context of the pay debate that's just taken place in the House of Commons and the discussion that's ensued, and clearly we want to talk about what happens next. So we know the strength of feeling that exists amongst PCS members on pay, and that when Rishi Sunak announced his pay freeze, and not as the government are now calling it a pay pause, we know that it will be a freeze of at least 1 year, which is actually a pay cut in real terms. So let's start off by calling it what it is. We know that after Mr. Sunak's announcement, signatures on our petition went through the roof, and we very quickly hit the 100,000 signatures that we needed to get a debate. The debate was called very quickly, a matter of only days later, and many members immediately wrote to their MP in order to lobby them. And it's telling then that not a single Tory MP turned up today to defend that position, and the junior Tory minister who was left to respond on behalf of her party tried to robustly defend the government's position on all of this, citing the plight of the private sector whilst ensuring that absolutely no debate took place. So with 15 minutes left to go, she refused to take any interventions at all, scared of having any proper debate on the subject, which is an absolute insult to the 200,000 plus members who signed both petitions which were the subject of the debate. And it really holds PCS members in utter contempt, which I think is what we've come to expect from this government. And we've seen attempts by this government over the last week in response to by Tory MPs, the ones that have bothered to reply to our members, saying to them, what about the private sector? Well, of course, it's not about the private sector versus the public sector. It's the good old divide and rule tactics that they always use. We know we need to try and unite everybody around the issue of fair pay. It's not about public versus private. It's not about public sector worker versus benefit claimant, but it's a campaign to ensure that we get everybody the pay increase that they deserve as key workers delivering vital services during a global pandemic. We want levelling up, not levelling down, and we want to get our members the recognition they deserve, not by being clapped on the Thursday night by getting the money in their pockets. And so clearly what we need to discuss now is what happens next. So I'll set out how I intend to run things tonight. In a minute, I'm going to introduce Rachel and ask her to tell us about tonight's debate. Then I'll ask Mark to go through the context in which we're discussing all of this, and then open it up for any questions or comments that any of you have for either Rachel or Mark. And I'd like to remind you to like and share this event so that we can get it out there as widely as possible, and let's publicise our plight to absolutely anybody that will listen. And just to start off by giving a real shout out to our signer Richard, who always does a sterling job keeping up with the speakers and making sure that this event is as accessible as possible. So I'm really pleased to introduce Rachel Hopkins, one of the MPs that was in the debate tonight, MP for Luton South since 2019. Rachel's a very proud PCS and Unite member, having joined the PCS when she got her first job in the civil service in the mid-90s, working for the Home Office in Croydon. She's also worked for a number of NDPBs, including the Local Government Commission for England, Teacher Training Agency, and more recently for the HFEA. Rachel has been a local councillor on Luton Borough Council since 2011. Prior to being elected in Parliament, served as the Cabinet's Executive Minister on Public Health. So Rachel, we're really pleased to have you along tonight, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit about tonight from your perspective.
Thank you, Fran, and good evening, everybody. I'm really pleased to be joining you. As Fran's glowing sort of intro said, you know, I've been a civil servant, I've been a public servant. I'm a real life person who had a career. I always talk about when I had my proper job rather than now when I'm an MP. It's an absolute privilege to be an MP, but I absolutely hold in my heart the fact that I have worked shoulder to shoulder with many of people like you who are good civil servants doing really difficult jobs in really difficult times. And that's why tonight it was an absolute disgrace that the minister did not want to debate That's the whole point of being in Parliament. And if I just elaborate a little bit, I mean, many of the points that Fran touched on were made by many of the, predominantly Labour members, as well as the spokesman from the SNP. No other parties turned up. And the difficult thing is because the debate itself was oversubscribed, I wasn't actually on the official list to speak, but I went along from the beginning because you can also sometimes get further forward into the debate and make what's called an intervention. That's ask a question, raise a point, get involved in the debate, which is what we thought we'd be able to do. I tried 3 times to raise a single point with the minister, even when she was in her final closing remarks and there was still a quarter of an hour left, and she blanked every single person who sort of stood up and made the gesture to say, can I intervene? Can I ask you a question? And I just wanted to ask a question about when I would receive a reply from a letter I coordinated about the pay issues just before the spending review. So that's over 2.5 odd weeks now, 24th of November. I got an official civil sort of response today saying you'll get a reply to that within normal times. Okay, that's another 20 days. So we're looking at 6 or 7 weeks potentially before I get a reply about the letter. I just wanted to ask her that. When will I get my reply on behalf of the many civil servants who are waiting to hear more about what the government thinks? And she just stonewalled. So that sets the tone of what this government thinks. They're not willing to have a debate. And Fran already said not a single Conservative MP went to defend their government's position. And the reason why I'm feeling rather riled up here is it is personal for me as well, because I was alongside many of us who were subject to the pay freeze and the pay pause. And okay, towards the end, I was like a middling manager. I had a pretty decent salary, I have to say, not as much as I'm on now, But I remember having conversations with some of my more junior staff. And one day, one of them said to me they were having Monday off. And I said, oh, you're doing something nice the weekend? And she went, no, I just can't afford to top up my Oyster card. I can't afford to come to work. And her role required her to be in the office. And that I take with me when I'm in debates in this place about that real world lived experience of our civil servants. When some civil servants are administering benefits that they actually need to look to take as well, shows that this government does not value what civil servants do. And I'm sure all of us can talk about some of the specifics, but I know that having the 2-year pay freeze and then 6 or 7 years of 1% meant that the average salary levels, and I'm going to check my stats again, the average civil servant on a salary of 26k is now worse off by over £2,000. And many of these points were made by different members in the debate today, including that link between public sector workers and private sector workers. And the minister tried to say that many of us don't care about the private sector. And we're saying, but we do, because if you pay public sector workers and civil servant workers decent wages, fair wages, they then spend them. And more often than not, that helps our economy because they're spending them in private sector businesses when we are buying food to feed our families, when we're, getting our necessities for day-to-day life. So it's about a political choice by this government to not invest in public services and therefore squeeze a race to the bottom for wages for both public sector workers and private sector workers. But she would not countenance that, even though that point was made a number of times. More and more of the MPs in the debate were getting exasperated because she would not stonewall. And I think that actually, sometimes I will say some ministers engage in the debate and they put their case and they understand the issues you've raised, and you get a sense of, well, at least you've listened, and we might not agree, but we can push on something here, and we'll try and today put more fire in my belly that we need to crack on with the pay campaign. I know it's something over many years we on and off we've really had to take action to stick up for our terms and conditions. I've joined the strike, I've been on the demos, and I think now, and I'm sure Mark will crack on with a bit more about this, about how we can take this forward. I know there's many MPs in Parliament, particularly on the Labour benches, who will absolutely take this forward in every way we can. I was really pleased to see that a good half of the people on the list to speak in the debate today were the new MPs from the 2019 intake. And I think that shows that there's plenty of fresh blood willing to stand up for all our workers to ensure that they get, decent pay and fair pay. I know I could talk for a while. That's what MPs do. It's probably why I'm there. But one of the things I wanted to say is there was reference to other public sector workers as much as civil servants, including local government, which is dear to my heart because I'm a local councillor. And in November every year, local councils led by the Local Government Association celebrate what local councils do and what local council workers do in a Councils Can Day. And I think we need to raise our profile of everyone who works in the civil service from the length and breadth of it. We know it could be, you could be looking after trees in Scotland, to sorting out, you know, driving licenses in Wales, to what I used to do. You know, I was based in London, but civil servants can too. And I think as much as we have a campaign around our terms and conditions, we should shine a spotlight on the brilliant things that all civil servants do, because so often it's behind the scenes keeping things going. And we've absolutely seen that during the pandemic, that it was civil servants were part of key workers too, under enormous strain, with a massive increase in so many levels of, you know, support that needed to be given. So I hope I'm more than happy to take some questions later. I don't want to take up too much time. I know it's a bit of a slow start, but you know, you have my absolute solidarity, and this is just the start of the campaign in Parliament. I can tell you that, and there's plenty of other MPs who are up there with us. So thanks, and you know, keep working hard. But honestly, we're on your side.
Okay, thanks so much, Rachel. That's fantastic, and it's obviously really good to know, because we have got a battle ahead of us. So I'm going to read a few shout outs. There's obviously a lot of branches messaging in to say that they're on the call. Solidarity with everybody that's joined tonight. And the first shout out is to the Home Office headquarters branch, DWP Gloucestershire, solidarity from a Unite community member in Nottingham, the Arms North East branch, the Revenue and Customs North London branch, and HMRC Peterlee PCS branch. So hello to all of you, and clearly if you want me to read out the name of your branch, just send those in and we'll get through as many as we can. So I'm going to hand over to Mark now, Mark Swatka, our General Secretary, to talk about the context of all of this and what we do next, because clearly, you know, we were waiting for this debate tonight. It's left a few of us scratching our heads in terms of the value of tonight, I think, and as Rachel has said, you know, the absolute unwillingness to engage with us and to have the debate. So over to you, Mark.
Well, thanks very much, Fran, and thanks very much to Rachel as well. I think I would just want to pay credit to Rachel, Fran, so any members and activists watching, a new MP she may be, but she's really hit the ground running, and it's so fantastic to have one of our own who fronts up some of the letter to Richie Sunak, for example, and trying to get into the debate 3 times today. So we're really grateful, Rachel. And obviously, we have a lot of supportive MPs in Parliament, but I think somebody who's been a PCS member and understands it through experience is really great to have you supporting us in this way. So thank you very much. And just apologies for anyone. There was a few technical problems at the beginning, in case anybody wondered why we started late. So apologies for that. So I want to pick up really about the debate itself, because I want to echo something you said, Fran, which is, obviously, I meet all the other unions in the TUC. I go to meetings where all the unions are represented. And the first thing to acknowledge is there's lots of unions who are struggling to get petitions up over 100,000. And many are bigger than us, also fighting on really important causes. So I think we should, first of all, recognise getting over 100,000 signatures was a great effort. And like you, I want to thank everybody who signed and has worked to get the petition over the line. We never thought the petition in itself was going to give us a fair pay rise. We wanted to do it for 2 reasons. One, to get a debate in Parliament. And I think there's lots of positives that come out of that debate, from not just the people who supported us, but exposing just how much the government doesn't really care, which we should use, I think, to get comfort out of the fantastic speeches made from MPs representing all corners of the UK today, who spoke with passion, were well informed, and they stood up for PCS members in a way that we often don't get across in the public domain. And I also hope that people will be very, very angry indeed about, as you said, the contempt with which the government has treated us. 8,000 members wrote to their MP in the last few days. Lots of Tory MPs had those letters. They're sending standard responses back that doesn't even mention the civil service. Some of them have sent really snotty letters back. Some of them have essentially told us we're lucky to have jobs. The fact that not a single one, even though 8,000 people have written, even bothered to turn up to the debate, speaks volumes, and only one Tory MP so far has agreed to meet PCS members in their constituency. So, I mean, this is shocking, because as the members of Parliament supporting us today pointed out, Boris Johnson was lauding us with praise a few months ago. Rishi Sunak was lauding us with praise. They've been clapping key workers, saying how lucky they are to have such a fabulous civil service. Yet not only do they cut our pay in real terms, after 11 years of pay restraint, they can't even be bothered to turn up to justify what they're doing, let alone give people the courtesy of meetings or responses. So that's told us something really important, I think. Lots of people are on our side. Lots of people are informed. The speeches today really got across in a way that was so pleasing to hear about the work that people are doing. The mentions across the board, the DWP, the HMRC, the prisons, transport, the court service, devolved government, NDPBs, everybody was getting a mention, so it's good to hear that. But we know Boris Johnson's got an 80-seat majority, and we know that his government could not be bothered to answer a petition of over 100,000 in a serious way. So what I take from that is we've got to publicise what's happened today. We've got to get the clips circulated in the union of these fantastic speeches that MPs made on our behalf. And we've got to make it clear that we're just not prepared to accept being treated in this way. And I think that's the important thing that we now move on. Now, the thing that's worth stressing is when we started this petition, we were in the middle of 2020. We were arguing for a decent pay rise of 10% for civil servants in 2020. And of course, no pay freeze has been announced. We end the year, and the government's pay freeze announcement isn't just a kick in the teeth for people whose pay they've cut in real terms for a decade. They've now broadened out this dreadful attack, not just to us, but to involve local government workers, firefighters, people who have kept this country, like our members have, ticking over and delivering vital services over the course of the last 6 months. So they've broadened out this attack. And that, I think, gives us an opportunity. So what I wanted to inform people tonight is that this debate is just the beginning. We're going to use what we've got out of today as to let people know who's going on, who's on their side, and who we now need to hold to account for treating us in such a terrible way. But we need to go into 2021 clear. If the government can't even be bothered to take that debate seriously, they are not likely to reverse their pay freeze unless they can be pressured to do so. And that pressure now is about us as a union and other unions in the TUC, mobilizing members, getting members involved in a lot of our campaign initiatives so that the government realizes it's going to have to do a U-turn. And they've done a lot of U-turns in the last few months, to be honest. It's been pretty shambolic on so many ways. And if they're not prepared to do a U-turn, we are prepared with our colleagues in other unions to try to force them to do that. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, we wanted to get across that your NEC last week debated pay, and in January, straight after Christmas, we'll be taking stock of what's happened in the debate today, what other unions are saying, and how we can make our campaign really vibrant, involving tens of thousands of people early in 2021. So we've already asked for and have had a meeting of all public sector unions with the TUC, and there's going to be a further meeting of all public sector unions in January. And that's important because, of course, the government's pay freeze doesn't just affect us. And I think the first thing we want to get across is we have a much better chance of forcing them to reverse their decision if it's not just us, but it's also teachers and local government workers and firefighters in a united public sector campaign. So that's what we're going to try and do early in January. If we're successful, and we've already been successful to an extent because the TUC is now going to try and coordinate as many unions as they can. And it looks like we're going to build up in the spring to trying to get a mass online mobilization of hundreds of thousands of people, if we can, around a virtual lobby of Parliament around the question of public sector pay. Now, that's been earmarked in for early March. And what we want to ensure is that when that happens, we are represented in huge numbers so that we're clear that the civil service is not at the back of the queue, we're in the front line alongside all our colleagues across the whole of the public sector. We've also agreed that on payday in January, February and March, we're going to hold various campaign events online where we're going to try and highlight different elements of the unfairness of what they've done. The equality impact, for example. It's always women and our black staff who disproportionately do worse. We're going to highlight that. We're going to highlight the low paid, the scandal that was revealed again today in the debate about people on the national minimum wage. We're going to talk about our members in the private sector, many of them working on outsourced contracts who don't even get sick pay, who often barely get just over the national minimum wage. So where the government's going to try and divide public against private, we'll be trying to unite people. Whether you're a shop worker, work in a job centre, or you're a cleaner, we all deserve decent pay rises, not to have our living standards cut at such a dreadful time. Ultimately, if the government is not prepared to back down when we hope to show them potentially millions of public sector workers are not just going to sit back, then we're going to have to consider, if all else fails, whether members would be prepared to take industrial action or vote for industrial action to pressure the government. Now, we're not there yet. This is a long way down the track, but we have to start preparing for that. And therefore, we're also going to be putting out lots of practical things we're going to ask people to do, to check that we've got your correct contact details. Make sure that if you're registered for a ballot paper and it's at work, that you switch it to home. We need everybody now getting their ballot papers at home, particularly during a pandemic. We want people to volunteer to get involved in our activities, because the more we can show we're doing that, particularly if it's with other unions, the better chance there is that the government is going to think, well, hang on, maybe we've bitten off more than we can chew. So all of those things going into the new year are what we want people to do. We'll be coming out for more case studies. I mean, it was almost enough to bring you to tears in the debate today that some of the MPs used some of our members' case studies, people using food banks, people thinking of having to leave the civil service who love their job but just cannot make ends meet, and people who have played such a vital role. So Fran, I'll finish by saying the debate's the start, not the end. Lots of positives from today from our supporters, lots of negatives from the government. So let's tell the government that arrogance is not going to be accepted. And as we go through Christmas and turn into the new year, we want all our members, whether they're in the public or private sector, to know that the union will do everything it can to reverse this dreadful attack. And that the more we can show that members are behind us, sending letters when we ask them to do so, turning up to virtual events, helping us with the lobby of Parliament, the more the government will realise it's not just our friendly MPs or me and you, Fran, who are saying it's outrageous. They'll realise that the people they know they need to deliver furlough, universal credit, keep the justice system running, our transport system running, and all the rest of it, are angry, and they better change their mind. So that's what we're going to do early in 2021. And obviously it'd be great to hear any questions that people have got, Fran, but I hope that we will see Rachel and all our other MPs. I'm sure we will, standing shoulder to shoulder with us into 2021. And I hope we will be standing with council workers, teachers, care workers, and all these people who have done so much, but are being treated so appallingly.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. And clearly, you know, there are lots and lots of messages coming in, lots and lots of questions coming in, and I'll try and get through as many of those as we can. Another handful of shout outs to Cardiff and District DWP branch, solidarity from the National Black Members Committee, HMRC Cumbernauld branch, North Staffordshire branch, DWP Glasgow, and the Forestry Commission branch. And we, as I say, we've got a range of questions, and what I'll try and do is fill them between Mark and Rachel, and making sure we can pick up as many of those as we can. So Rachel, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about this. The question from Margaret: MPs were paid £10,000 for working from home, but civil servants were told to offset that against any the fact that they were working from home against any save costs, for example, travel. But surely MPs have saved their costs too. Is there anything you would want to say in response to that? I mean, clearly you don't make the rules, but it does seem an inequality, doesn't it? That's the way that they treat MPs as opposed to the way that they treat our members.
I get that. A little bit of clarity. We weren't given an additional £10,000. It was just, if we needed it, there was a little bit more put on our office cost allowances. So, for example, not all my staff have a laptop, but when I had to ask them to work from home, I literally had to buy a laptop for a member of staff. So we had a little bit more of an allowance that was allocated. But I absolutely understand that it does fly in the face of staff who had to just at turn of a hat see if they could make space and work from home. And we know the additional costs that come with that, whether if you've got the right kit, let alone if you've got the right environment. Plus, we know we're into winter now and it costs more to heat and to light. So I absolutely I get your point. I had to use a bit of that allowance, but I won't use all of it. But it does seem a little bit that, oh, let's make sure you can work straight away, when is the same level of support and guidance offered to staff who are also having to turn on a twopence to work. So a good point, well raised. Little bit of clarity just on what happened.
That's really helpful, Rachel. Thank you. This is more of a comment than anything. It comes from David in the MOJ group, who works for HMCTS, who says, can it be noted that here in HMCTS, the pay rise given was allocated to senior managers and judges only, leaving the lower paid grades to struggle? How morally wrong is that? Please also highlight that many of us are only on £21,000 or less. The public still have a misconception that we're paid far more than that. And I hope that the campaign goes well. So, thanks for that, David. And clearly, it's worth remembering, isn't it, that a lot of our members are incredibly low paid. And when we talk about even the fairly modest pay rises that have been awarded, they aren't always awarded across the board. And that is a real issue. There's a question for Mark next from Stephen Griffiths. It says, if it took us that long for the union to get to 100,000 signatures on a public petition, how confident are we that we will pass the ballot threshold in order to have an industrial dispute? I mean, in my view, I think we did pretty well in terms of the speed in which we reached the 100,000 signatures. But Mark, I don't know if you want to respond to Stephen on that.
Well, I think the first thing is to say that everybody would like to get there quicker, but as I said earlier on, there's lots of unions I meet who are really struggling to get anywhere near 100,000. So I don't think we should probably not knock what we've done, is actually think that is in itself a good start. But Stephen does raise an important point, that if it does come to industrial action, and certainly the NEC's view when it met last week is we have to start planning that is a strong possibility, and probably, given what happened today, more likely than it was, given the government give no indication that they're prepared at the moment to listen. Then being able to produce a majority of our members, and more than 50%, is now a prerequisite. So that's why one of the things we want to focus on now is some practical things. Now, nobody should take from this that we're announcing any ballot, next week or anytime soon. It's just getting our preparations right. So part of that has to be ensuring that we've got everybody's contact details up to date. A lot of people in the last ballot had ballot papers sent to their workplace addresses, and there were lots of problems. So we are encouraging people to ensure that your registered address is now home. Even more important now in the pandemic than ever before. We're asking people to give us their personal contact details, emails, mobile phones, because one of the things in the signature petitions, Fran, is that we tried some new things, like text messages and things that were incredibly successful. We were contacting thousands and thousands of people. And out of that, many, many people said they wanted to get involved in the union and they wanted to do something to help. So Stephen's right to point out that it's a big thing we have to get over if it comes to it. But if we all start working now, I'm absolutely certain that we have the ability to do it. We came 1.2% short last time. And of course, the injustice done to us now is arguably even worse than before. And the last thing I would say about this is, if we're successful in getting our union colleagues to also go down the same route, we want to make sure that, look at the CWU, the Communication Workers Union. They just announced a ballot result with a 97% yes vote and a 72% turnout. We've got to ensure that if it comes to showing our strength of feeling, that nobody thinks the civil service and PCS is a softer touch than anyone else. So we've got to make sure now that we do as well as we can getting people involved. And if we all work together, I'm absolutely certain we can do that if that proves necessary.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. A few more shout outs: GFT East Midlands branch, MOJ Greater Manchester, Solidarity from the PCS Samba Band, HMRC Bradford, DWP Lanarkshire branch, and MOJ Scotland. So hello and Thanks so much for your message from all of those branches. I want to we always ask for case studies, and we ask people to give us examples of how low pay affects them in real life. And this isn't really a question, but I just think it's worth reading out, because I think it highlights what a real problem low pay in the civil service is. And this is from Jane, that's not her real name, also working in HMCTS, like our previous question. She says, it may interest you to know that within HMCTS, our people's survey results this year on pay across HMCTS as a whole had just 18% satisfaction with pay, and in my building only 11%. On a personal note, my situation is so dire that I have £6,000 of debt on credit cards, which I've been forced to incur just to eat and pay my rent and pay my bills. I use food banks once a week, sometimes twice a week, sometimes twice a month, because if I didn't, I wouldn't eat. I live alone and so I'm the sole income earner, and despite being disabled, I struggle to cope with everyday life. I love my job, but I can't survive much longer, and I'm having to consider other positions outside of the civil service. I want to stay where I am. I'm good at my job and I love making a positive difference to people, but I'm being forced out of it because it's simply not enough to survive on. I have huge hopes for tonight's parliamentary debate. My career depends on it. Well, how does she feel after witnessing what we've seen tonight? And that is why our campaign is so important and why it's such a big issue for many of us. There's a question now from Nick Parker, which I think probably, Mark, is for you. Mark commented about the TUC Public Sector Unions meeting on Monday to discuss a coordinated response to the pay freeze. Do we have any update on that? And is there a plan for the campaign?
Yeah, so evening to Nick, and thanks for the question. So all the unions involved had a preliminary discussion and have agreed to meet again early in January. And they've all gone back to, if you like, float the idea now of a joint campaign. The TUC is producing a campaign plan that will probably kick off with this big mass virtual lobby of Parliament early in March to try and get huge participation. All unions have gone away to do what we've done, because one of the things that we did, Fran, was we've met the Cabinet Office, because of course Rishi Sunak delivered his announcement, but we've met the Cabinet Office to say, right, how's this going to apply in the civil service? And they've confirmed that the pay remit this year will be for 0%. There may be some performance pay for some people, there may be some business cases allowed, but in reality they've confirmed the pay freeze applies to us. So all the other unions are going to go through the same process to their individual employers, and then we're going to meet back in early January. I'm optimistic that there will be an agreement to have a joint campaign. What we have to make sure is that as that campaign grows, if the government aren't prepared to listen to lobbies of Parliament or everything else, that other unions like us are in a position that they think if we had to, we can win ballots and get over 50% turnouts. So I think it's going to take some time, and I think there'll be some milestones set. But what is clear is if the first event called is in March, that needs to be successful. We've got to get off to a flying start, and we need PCS to be really well involved. And I would just add, therefore, Fran, that the point you just read, that case study you just read out, we'll try and get some snippets of this debate circulated, because what I think people need to get across is our MPs who supported us were giving real personal stories, real facts, real figures, exposing that what the government's doing makes no sense economically. And what we got from the minister was a sort of pre-prepared ideological speech about essentially it's worse in the private sector. As if she didn't realize in our own union, we have people being made redundant as we speak in HMRC, in the culture sector, you know, so the idea that we've got it really great. But to me, that's what this campaign has to be. They'll just trot out in a very sort of dehumanized way, stats and ideology. We've got to make this real. This is real people in communities the length and breadth of Britain. And if other unions do the same, I have no doubt we could recreate the conditions that we saw when we all campaigned about pensions many years back. But what we have to do is make sure that we get off to a flying start. And I think that's my key message to all our activists, is to go into the new year thinking every new recruit helps, everyone getting involved in the union helps. And if the first thing we do is a joint big virtual lobby of Parliament, let's make sure that we've got really well represented with PCS members in that.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Question, Rachel, I don't know if you can pick this up. Jackie Lawler has said, what's the point of signing the petition if there's no proper debate? That makes a mockery of all those who sign the petition. So leading on from that, how do you think we can make a case of pay reform in the civil service when the government just talks more generally across the board about the public sector? So are there any tips, I suppose, that you can give us in terms of the way we might try and highlight our campaign, if that's possible?
I think there's always a point in taking action, because doing nothing doesn't change anything, does it? So this is just the start. And I think the fact that it was, as Mark's really pointed out, it's something that's got on over 100,000, so therefore it actually had a debate. Now, the minister didn't respond well, she trotted out her speech, but they heard all these points that were made, and we've got them on the record. So down the line, when they keep trying to troll out other points to us, or they pretend that it was all rosy to us, we've got it on the record. That's part of a debate. Now, usually it's two sides of a debate and have a discussion. Well, this was pretty one-sided of us putting our cases and then just listening to the minister. But that is just the start. And sometimes it builds into this bigger campaign. And absolutely, Mark saying in the new year. And the point I'd just like to add as well is getting the real life stories out there. My first year in Parliament, I've absolutely seen how so many of the government MPs don't know what it's like to just have ordinary working lives on ordinary incomes, on low pay, because they can't understand when we stand up and say, but this means this. Why is it we have civil servants, nurses having to use food banks? It's because of low pay, high rents, increases in cost of living, and the fact that the pay is not increasing in line with that. And we know that, and we have those lived experiences. So I encourage everyone to write to your MPs and tell them, because that is not just the morally right thing to do. So MPs like me will listen and try and do something about it. But even if you just get to those Tory MPs who haven't done anything about it, and you just keep plugging away and plugging away and plugging away, they will have to do something, even if it's purely selfish, to sort their email inbox out, if they agree to have that virtual lobby. And these things matter. So doing no action means we won't affect change. But if we chip away and chip away, it builds into that bigger campaign.
That's great, Rachel, thank you. And it also sort of builds on the point that Margaret makes. Can we highlight to the public the appalling way the Tories have effectively blocked this debate? It's outrageous how they didn't turn up, and then they get the junior ministers to stonewall, and that's exactly what we've just been talking about. So thank you for that, Margaret. Okay, another few shout outs: HMRC Portsdown Vectis branch, DWP Sunderland branch, MOJ Associated Offices branch, Northwest Arms branch, DWP Somerset branch, and DWP Stockton. Okay, can I just remind people, if you know me and you are sending me messages in my own Facebook account, I can't see them. All I can see is the messages that are being sent through PCS. So if you have a question you want raised and it won't get to me any quicker, send it to me personally on Facebook. You're best off sending it via PCS, because I can't see my own account right now. Okay, we have a question next from Catherine from the DWP. I worked in the office during COVID all the way through. I got a weekly golden hour. Yep, that sure made all the difference to me. And considering temporary EO staff are starting on a higher salary than the one I'm currently on, not on the max after 20 years in the grade, really says it all. So, Mark, I don't know if you want to comment at all in terms of that.
Well, I do actually, because that's a fabulous example. It's terrible to hear, but it's a very good example of people's real circumstances. Because one thing that didn't get mentioned today, but I think is really important, is that Rishi Sunak claimed when he made this announcement that public sector workers last year had a pay rises of 4%.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't had a pay rise of 4% in the civil service since, I can't remember when. It certainly hasn't been in the last 10 or 15 years. So it's misinformation. it's using dodgy stats and trying to apply them in a very general way. And what that point we just heard brings out, it's not just that our headline increases have been poor. We have no pay progression in the way that still exists in other parts of the public sector. We have all sorts of problems and anomalies in our pay systems. And one of the things that was good today is that quite a few of the MPs brought into the debate, not just the pay freeze is outrageous, but the fact we have 200 different sets of pay negotiations where there should be one. And of course, if we had one, it would allow us to solve all these different anomalies between the different departments that allowed unequal pay and the fact that we have such a mess. And on this, here's some good news. Now, it probably wasn't intended, but Michael Gove was giving evidence last week to the Public Accounts Committee, I think it was, and we had briefed our MPs. And one of the MPs said to him, why do you have 200 bargaining units in the civil service? There should be one. To which Michael Gove said, and I'll quote, and I think we probably tweet it, Michael Gove said, that's a very good point. The balkanization, his quote, not mine, of all these different pay systems doesn't seem right to me. We should have a single civil service. So we will be pursuing that now with the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, because that's exactly what we've been arguing for now for decades. And making fair pay system as well as ending the pay freeze is really important, because just getting the government to end the pay freeze is in itself not enough if we still have derisory sums of money given to departments and everybody fighting over very small amounts. We need a uniform pay system that deals with the progression points, the inequalities in our system, the huge gender pay gap, the race pay gap. You know, these things require a single set of talks to be put right everywhere. And so I would say, you know, whether people are watching this from the court service, from HMRC, DWP, from the Driving Standards Agency, the government has used the 200 sets of pay talks to fragment and to make people just look at their own little bit and the small amounts of money available. We want the government to talk centrally and get proper sums of money on the table that everybody can be treated equally. And, you know, there's a lot of understandable sort of negativity about how bad the debate was because the Tories didn't turn up. But I keep going back to my points. A lot of positives about the great points that were made that are on the record, and we will chase those up, including the rights for pay progression, equal pay across the board, that the question raises.
Okay, thank you, Mark. There's a couple of things that you probably will want to pick up. The next one is from Blair in the HMRC, who says, whilst I agree with most of this, as far as I'm aware, the pay freeze doesn't apply to those earning under 24,000. So again, I support the message, but it appears to be disingenuous by leaving out that information. If it's the case that not all public service workers earning under 24,000 will get some sorts of increase, then I'd want to know. So I don't know if you can sort of correct that.
Yeah, so the Chancellor's announcement did say that anybody on under £24,000 could get £250, or he said would get at least £250. He also said that health workers would be exempted from the pay freeze. Now, I've met the health unions, and all the health unions have told me that it is far from clear about what's going to happen in the health service this year. There's been no money put on the table. So it is not clear how that is going to be interpreted. And the same for us. Yes, the £250 allegedly will be paid across the board. That's less than £5 a week, considerably less once we take into account all our other commitments. Still represents a real terms pay cut. And of course, we believe that the people at the lower ends of the pay scale, they don't really need £250. Our pay claim last year was looking for a minimum uplift of £2,000 because the poverty that people are on at that level, you know, it just does not take people to what we actually need. And so the question is right. There is that £250. We've got to get into discussions around it. But, you know, our view is if you're on 24,100, you're going to get zero. If you're on under 24,000, yes, you get £250, but that is really a drop in the ocean as to what you deserve. So I'm glad the question has pointed that out. But really, it's something that I think the government felt politically it had to make it look like they were doing something. but it was pointed out in the debate today that actually that's quite an insulting amount of money for people, many of whom are claiming benefits. And as John McDonnell said in the debate, you know, in-work poverty in Britain is at a staggering level, and £250 for people on those sorts of wages is not going to address in-work poverty.
No. Okay, thank you. And then there's a question that's come up a few times, and I think it is important to address it. Both Colette from the MOD and John from the DWP have a very similar question, and I'll read out Colette's version, which is, I really don't think this is the time to be asking for a pay rise, especially when so many people are losing jobs. For now, just be glad that we have a job for the coming months and leave this agreement for another day. You will need to save our jobs soon, so spend your time thinking and planning for that day, please. So, and John's contribution is fairly similar, just happy to have a job and a role in which I can help others. I think it's wrong to be asking for a pay rise. Mark, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, and I'm glad that these questions have come in, because let's be clear that the government's central strategy here to try and get away with this is to try to make the argument, well, yes, it's tough for you, but it's a lot worse out there in the private sector. And I think what we have to say is that if we accept the logic of that argument, it is a race to the bottom. We are seeking to have an equality of misery, whereas what we should be about is an aspiration to raise everybody up. So the comparison with the private sector is not one that we can accept, but we will not be falling for the divide and rule, which is why the campaign that we're running will also, we hope, include private sector unions representing shop workers, people in other parts of the economy who just as much as us deserve secure jobs and pay rises. So I think it's important to get that across. I think it is also important to get across that for all the difficulties in the private sector, and I don't underestimate them, it is the public sector and the civil service that has had a decade of pay restraint. So we don't come to this for having like a 1-year freeze on our pay because we've had a decade of pay growth. We've had 10 years of cuts. And that if the government was to get away with this, and the majority of trade union members in Britain work in the public sector, then far from being, if you like, a show of solidarity to those in the private sector, what we're actually doing is letting them get away with this, which means everybody will be worse off in the longer run. And I think that, you know, the way that our MPs argued it today is really true. The best favour we can do for people in the private sector is make sure our members earn enough money to be able to spend that money in the economy and in the private sector. Because the job losses that are being faced are because of COVID, because the economy is shrinking. Squeezing our pay so that our members, some of whom will have to give up their jobs or actually will have no disposable income to spend, will actually make things worse in the private sector front. So I get why people have seen that argument from the government and may feel a tad, you know, it's not a bad instinct, is it, for somebody to think, well, somebody's worse off than me, am I doing the wrong thing asking for a pay rise?
Yeah.
But actually, it isn't the wrong thing, it's got to be the right thing. And here's the final point. We asked the Cabinet Office to confirm that this was a 1-year pay freeze. The Cabinet Office made it absolutely clear to us they could confirm no such thing. The Chancellor has made a 1-year announcement because he's made a 1-year comprehensive spending review announcement. Rumours are swirling that actually this may well be a 2 or 3 year policy. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I do know that if we don't kick up a fuss now, it makes it more likely that the Chancellor will think, well, you know what, that wasn't too bad, was it? I'll do it again. And I think that, frankly, is something that we really should be worried about. So, you know, best way, as I say, to support people in the private sector, I think, is for unions to show that strong unions can make a difference. And then that benefits our colleagues in the private sector, whom we are supporting.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we're fast running out of time. There are 3 more shout outs: HMPO Liverpool, HMRC Salford branch, and Battersea and Wandsworth Trades Council. So shout out to all of you. There's a couple of comments here that I don't think we've got time to respond to, but I'll certainly read out. And then a couple of questions for both Mark and Rachel. So Robert says the public sector is a massive employer in the northeast, a part of the country that was promised to be levelled up. Can we highlight this inconsistency? And Vicky says, I've worked over 45 hours a week over my 4-day working week, and work has exponentially increased. Fed up with being asked to deliver more with less people before this next pay freeze. My staff are overworked and very tired, and they feel I'm the only one who values them now. So again, just really telling, isn't it, about the situation we find ourselves in. There's a question for Rachel from Lee. It's a bit of a procedural question, Rachel, and you know, I'm not sure whether he's entirely picked it up right, but it might be helpful if you can clarify. At the end of the session, when the vote was taken, there was no opposition to the question. Who is eligible to vote? Only those in the horseshoe or everyone in the public gallery? And why didn't those present not vote no, given the debate was not really debated? Now, I don't suppose you can answer for anybody else, but is there any clarity you want to bring about the process and actually what does that vote mean, if anything?
To be fair, it wasn't really a vote. So when a petition comes before, this was a backbench petition that was heard in Westminster Hall. Sometimes you'll have just motions that are heard, like a general debate that's heard in the chamber. So today, as we're sitting, there's been a general debate on COVID-19. And then a motion is then just put saying that this House agrees that XYZ has been considered, and people go yes or no. So today it wasn't a vote one way or other. It was just to sort of say, in a procedural sense, so we have considered these petitions in this debate. So we went aye. So we're also so it wasn't a vote as such. It's, you know, it's just to say we've considered this motion, and I think all the opposition MPs did the legwork on that one. Don't know how much the minister did, but if that's an explanation, it was there are really details about being COVID distance and only 15 of us, and we have to be apart and all that, which is why it might have looked a bit sparse too.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, I'll because of the running out of time, I'll try and wrap a couple of questions up together and see if you can respond. Sarah Enza said, I think a lot of people want to fight, but they need someone to take a lead. So why shouldn't that be our union? We will get support if we make the arguments, whatever the Daily Mail and the Tory trash papers are saying. Question for Rowena, will it be targeted action? Obviously a bit early to say at this stage. Question from Declan, what action is going to be taken? PR exercises are pointless. We know the Tories failed to even turn up or acknowledge the issue. And you know, just question from Mike, how do we get all departments to engage with the ballot when some are going through their own pay reform? So there's quite a lot in there, and I don't know if you want to try and respond to as much of that as you can.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks again for all the comments. And for any that we don't get around to being able to answer, we will look at them, Fran, and get back to people.
Yeah.
In terms of any proposed action, our starting point is that, you know, this will be a marathon, not a sprint. We don't need to be thinking about what action in January or February. What we need to be doing is getting the message across that we're determined to do everything we can to force the government to go backwards. That, to answer Sarah's point, we will take the lead. But in taking the lead, we recognise that if other unions are there with us, it'll make our job a lot easier. So what we're going to focus on at the start of 2021 is trying to encourage and persuade all unions to campaign together as best we can. And I'm optimistic, definitely, for the first few months, that is going to happen, and will probably involve all public sector unions. Now, I know that some unions are having similar debates to the ones that the question you asked me a bit of a while back, you know, about, oh, is this the right time? There's been feedback that the members that we're representing, you know, in some of the frontline services, to quote the unions, people are fatigued, they're at their wits' end. And of course, what we need to do is I think, get it across that where all that fatigue and despair will be worse if the government can do this and get away with it. So part of trying to help lift morale is people seeing that we're working together to confront them. Because we haven't said it yet, but the amount of money required to give all public sector workers a pay freeze is fairly modest. and it is a lot more modest than the 16 billion that the government voted to put into defence spending, for example. So it's about choices for the government, isn't it? Somebody made a great speech today about all the sort of tax breaks there are in different parts of the economy. That is billions and billions. So we know this can be done if we can persuade them. So yes, Sarah, we want to take the lead, absolutely. And part of that has to be mobilising our own union to get everybody involved and participating. If it comes to deciding we now need to turn this into a ballot, well, what we would want to do is make sure that as many members of our union as possible were covered by the ballot. So again, there was a question asked. It is difficult when there's different talks going on in different departments sometimes. And, you know, we have talks going on at the moment in HMRC, for example. So we've got to try to unite our own union as well as uniting with others. But if it comes to a ballot, we have to get more than 50% of people voting. And the thing I think you could say with certainty from the last time we did it is nobody is interested in just doing something for show. PR, I think, was the phrase. We are not interested in doing something tokenistic. If it comes to that, we have to be able to show that we can do something that will make the government feel the heat, which is why if we're doing it with other unions, it makes us much stronger. But if it is just us, we know that the work our members are doing is so pivotal that, you know, the government knows our importance. My guess is that actually the government starts from a point of view of thinking we can't get over 50% in the turnout, so they don't have to worry about it. If they start to see that we are really getting people involved and that we do get over the threshold, then I think they'll have something different to think about. And I think that's what we've got to remind ourselves. They are going to really try to hope that people are either despairing, don't think it's the right thing to do to ask for money, or just think we can't do it. Our job has to be to say we can do it. And if we do get to that point, the work we do is so vital, we can force them to do something different. And if we're doing that with council workers and teachers and everybody else, then all of that with bells on, really, Fran. So, yeah, you know, I hope people can see from that, this is a campaign that first of all has to involve everyone. And if it comes to action, it has to be something that the government takes seriously. So, you know, I'll just sort of finish by saying, I think today, despite the government behaving shockingly, it was remarkably refreshing to see a debate that was because we had managed to get 100,000 signatures, that saw MPs from all parts of the country make brilliant speeches, really well researched, passion. And it's quite nice to see there's politicians prepared to say that for us. So we've got to take that now and use it as motivation to say, well, we're going to do our bit as well. And ultimately to make the government pay the price for their arrogance, total lack of care or respect for their own staff, and to really say you're not going to get away with it.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Look, we have run out of time, and I recognise that there are still questions coming in that we haven't got to. But I'm just going to invite Rachel and then Mark, if there's anything you want to say in closing, but as a way of summing up, really. And then I'm afraid we will have to bring tonight to a close. So, Rachel, anything at all?
Just a couple of points. I mean, even tonight, having this discussion and hearing all the questions and the people who are interested, the connection between, you know, you, the electorate, and us, the MPs, is really, really important. And I'm really pleased to be able to come in to Parliament as a PCS member, having worked in jobs like many of you before coming into Parliament, because it keeps it real. And it's so important that MPs hear what it means to be a civil servant, and the hard work you do, the situations you have to work in, but also why you absolutely deserve a pay rise after 10 years of austerity. And so, you know, you've got my full support, and let's keep on fighting, and let's keep on chipping away. And next year, you know, we're going to have to build into bigger things, I think. But, you know, I'm really pleased to be able to speak with everybody tonight.
It's been brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks so much. And Mark, anything in closing from you?
Well, only to thank Rachel, thank yourself, Fran, and to thank our fabulous team behind the scenes that people can't see, but make this all run smoothly. And our fantastic interpreter, who's a veteran and for us. So I just want to say some thanks. I wanted to thank the People's Assembly, Fran. I know that they've been doing this out on their Facebook page. They've been big supporters whenever we've campaigned. So I want to thank all of them and their supporters. And to just finish by saying that we still want, we've started today, we're still hoping that Labour will bring a debate in the main chamber around the question of public sector pay. So I wanted to just stress that, you know, if you've had emails from us lobbying your MP, the point that Rachel made is really, really important. You know, we saw great support today from Labour and from Chris Stevens from the SNP, but we want to pressure the Tories, because the point was made earlier on about the red wall seats. You know, this was a government that runs seats where there's lots of public sector workers saying they were going to level up, and this is their thanks. So we want pressure on MPs, and we also want to lobby, you know, people who are not just the people who spoke for us today, but we want Labour to put this debate down. So we want all members of Parliament to realise how strongly we feel. So we're urging people to lobby. And my final point is, look, it's obviously terrible times. You know, London's gone into tier 3 today. You know, I'm living in a part of the country where the NHS is creaking at the seams, where, you know, COVID is going up. Deaths are worse than their worst forecast. So, you know we're in terrible times. It's going to be a difficult Christmas for everybody, Fran. And in that context, it's been a very hard year because, you know, we care about these things, but our focus has been on fighting the pandemic and, you know, really supporting people in some tragic situations. When we come back after Christmas, there's vaccines on the horizon. You know, we hope that finally we'll get some, you know, we'll get to where we need to get to with the pandemic. But then I think the government is going to follow up what it's doing here by making our people pay the cost of fighting the pandemic. That already has taken the form of pay. Pensions are probably going to come under scrutiny. There could well be job losses. And that was a question earlier on. What we have to show is they may have an 80-seat majority. They may think they can get away with it. But the old adage is if we can mobilize our members to be part of a campaign and others do the same, we can force them to do a U-turn. If Marcus Rashford and others can force them to do U-turns through their, you know, through being celebrities, imagine what power we have if all of the people who kept the care homes running, universal credit in payment, the furlough scheme, the transport systems, the ports and airports, teachers, council workers. Let's not talk ourselves down and there's nothing we can do. Boris Johnson's all powerful, you know. Let's actually talk ourselves up. We provide a vital role in society and they're treating us badly. And in 2021, we're going to try to make them do a U-turn. So that's my thoughts. And any way people can get involved, do so to help.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. And I think that's probably a good note to finish on. So apologies if we didn't get to your question. We did get through an awful lot, but there are probably still some that we missed, and we will try and make sure we follow up those after tonight. Thank you. A huge thanks, my thanks to Rachel and Mark, because I mean, you've filled in a lot of questions there and you've obviously done that really well. And I think our members really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to do that. And in closing, just to thank all of you for joining tonight, and for those that listen afterwards, making sure that you know take on board the points that have been raised, and wishing you all a very enjoyable and hopefully a bit of a rest over the festive season. Stay safe and no doubt and refresh ourselves ready for the campaign that we know is ahead of us coming into the new year. So thanks for your time, thanks for your input, and thanks for engaging in all of this, and let's make sure that we do everything possible to support our members in winning the pay rise that they deserve and the recognition that they deserve. Thank you very much, everybody, and good evening to you all.